the Business of Rowing podcast. I'm super excited that our first guest on this is Beth Anderson. If you know Beth, she has been a significant figure in our community for a while. I'm gonna let Beth tell her story. Beth, welcome. Thanks for being on our first podcast here. I'm really excited to have you. For people that maybe don't know you, give us a little bit of background about your career in rowing, maybe how you got started, a little bit of the resume and where you are now.
Well, John, thanks for having me. And I got started in rowing by accident. So in high school, my mom, I was riding horses and they got a little expensive and my mom got rid of the horse. So then I didn't really have anything to do. So someone's like, you should come row. So I was part of the first Pacific Rowing Club group.
Oh, okay. All right. So you're a Bay Area native then. So you're from
sort of. I was raised by a bit of a gypsy. So I was my mother, we started out in the Bay Area, then we moved to Lake Tahoe. And then we moved to Europe and we came back and our dog had moved to Sun Valley. So we went to Sun Valley and then we ended up back in the Bay Area when my stepfather realized we studied for high school in the hot tub and he brought us down to actually, try to get an education, which we'll see if that actually happened. But anyway, we ended up in the Bay Area for my senior year of high school. In the peninsula, I went to Sacred Heart Menlo Park. So,
all right. Yes, so you started Pacific?
I started at Pacific. BB Meese, I don't know if you know BB Bryans, who's now the Wisconsin coach.
Right.
She actually started Pacific Rowing Club with her ex-husband, Joe Meese. So she was my novice coach. And
wow.
Yeah, way back in the day.
Wow.
Wood oars, wood boats, way back. I'm way old, so we're just, going with it. But that's how I got started. I went to UCLA, which was amazing. And then when I graduated,
you rode there as well.
I did. I rode 4 years at UCLA.
Okay, great.
And then we went, and then I went to San Francisco, got a job selling computer software. And they needed a coach at Pacific.
That's all you do, right? That's all you do in San Francisco.
Right. My dad told me how to have a real job. So I thought, well, real job. All right, I'll get a real job. Right. And then about 8 months into my real job, my boss told me I had to decide between my vocation and my avocation. And I said, okay, here's my 2 weeks notice. I'm resigning. So I ended up working at Pacific for a few years and then going to graduate school at Purdue to coach.
Okay.
So I've kind of been around. I coached at Purdue, I coached at UC Davis, and then mostly juniors. So after that, it was Oakland. I coached 1 year in Chicago.
I didn't know about the Chicago stint. So you're out there in the Windy City as well.
Well, my husband went to graduate school in Chicago.
Okay.
And so I moved there with a 6-month-old baby and, no money. And I was just hanging out and someone knew I was there and they said, why don't you coach our kids' crew? And I said, well, I have this baby and I can't. They're like, we'll babysit. So we rode at Lincoln Park. So every time we practiced, they would take her to the zoo. So she was in heaven. Everyone was in heaven, So
isn't that the thing where you move to if you're a coach and you move to a city, they find you. They root you out and
they find you. And you're like, no, and then you're like, well, it'd be kind of fun. I'm kind of bored. I don't know anyone. So anyhow, it's great. We had a great time. So anyhow, I've done coaching now for a while. My longest stint was at Oakland Strokes. So
right. So and now you're the executive director at Norcal. And you've been there for how many years? You've been at Norcal? 4 years?
I started 2019 at is that right? 2009. I think fall of 2019.
Right before the pandemic. So
yeah, it was a great introduction.
Right. But what we want to, the topic of today's podcast is, specifically the title is Community and Municipal Relations. And I reached out to you because I know you have this amazing history working with the local municipality, specifically when you were at Oakland Strokes, and building the amazing facility they have there on the estuary, the Tidewater Boathouse. Is that right?
It's the Tidewater
And
Boathouse. Yeah.
Tidewater Boathouse. And I think people would be really, really interested to hear your perspective on that process of how you went from, I think the Strokes were at Jack London, and they were even before Jack London. They were at another place, I believe,
Yes,
right?
before
And
Jack London. So, Jack London is sort of on a little bit of an inlet off the estuary, and right across
right,
from there's an empty lot, and that's where
right,
Oakland used to be. And they were
right.
in a building that was owned by Crowley, which is a tugboat company.
Okay,
So
right,
yeah, and so as Crowley started to move out, the Oakland Strokes moved in, and they leased the building to them for $1 a year, and then
wow,
the city of Oakland said, well, the building's been condemned, you have to move, but you can't really kick out a junior team. It's hard,
right,
public
right.
publicity wise. And that
Right.
was
So
right when they were building the boathouse right across the way. So we were actually the first tenants. I wasn't part of building the Jack London Aquatic Center,
right,
but we were the first tenants to be in there. And it was fun
right.
when we first went in because we had the whole place to ourselves for about almost a year.
Sure, sure. So, and that was like 2002 time, let's say,
Wow. Wow.
early
Good,
2000s.
good
Sorry, I
question.
don't mean to talk about dates.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. I could look it up, but it was a
Right,
long
right.
time ago. It's a couple years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
And
Okay, all right. So you're in Jack London and things are going pretty well. Maybe the club's growing, the organization's growing, Oakland Strokes, you're probably getting well north of 100 athletes every day.
so we
At
we went
what
up to
point?
over 200 at that point, and that's when
Okay,
we realized we had we only had initially we had 2 bays at initially we had 5, but we
right.
ended up in 2 bays, and then they kept squishing us because they're like, well, everyone else, it just became this,
Yeah,
and it's hard. It's hard to be in a boathouse with. I mean, it's not hard to be in a boathouse with a lot of people, but it takes a lot of coordination.
right,
And it was
right, right.
but it was good. It was good. It was fun, and we had a great time. We realized we needed to have a little more autonomy. There's nowhere to leave your motorboats out. You had to roll them into
Right,
the bays every day. There were just a lot of
okay,
things, and the bigger you
right,
get, the more you need. And we just became sort of a little bit too cramped. So luckily we had some amazing board members. I will honestly
right,
say our board was amazing. And we
okay,
had
okay,
one specific person, Peter Halen, who, someone when they get a bone and they just go, and
right,
nothing
right,
gets in his way. So
right.
he was amazing.
Okay.
And
So at a certain point, somebody said, or either the board of directors or you said, we're getting too big. We can't live in 2 bays anymore. We're going to start losing athletes. We're going to start discouraging people from maybe participating in the team and the sport. And we want to grow. We want to provide more opportunity. We need a new facility, right? So that
it was
conversation
all
starts.
that. And also, we really did want to get involved in Oakland. We really wanted to get involved in making our community look more like the community of Oakland. So,
Right, right,
we really did. We really wanted to be involved in that. And so
right,
part of this boathouse at Tidewater is it's a community. It's not a community boathouse. Let's not say that, but it is definitely, it was positioned as access to the water
right,
for youth in Oakland, right?
right,
So,
right,
I mean, I think that's how we sort of got it. We actually identified all the land that's possible on the Oakland estuary, right? And then we sort of started. This guy Peter Halen was amazing, and he
right.
really found the people and talked to the people and got through the process. And we finally came upon the best piece of land was a piece of land, this little strip of land right there against the estuary,
Right.
that was part of East Bay Regional Parks.
Okay. Okay.
And
So when you were searching for land, were you looking at every possible public piece of land or public and private?
everything.
Everything.
We went
Everything.
everywhere. Yeah, we just decided everything that we could possibly we even looked at an old restaurant. We're like, we could take that over, and we probably could, but there's
Right,
a lot
right,
of
right.
things involved. So one of the
So that was that kind of the first step, was let's find the spot, or let's find
a spot. Like, where
yeah,
could we do it? And I think we got down to like 2 or 3 spots, and then we
right,
continued to research all 3 of them. And one was this one at East Bay Regional Parks.
right,
And the thing about being involved with the parks, there's a lot of positives, there's a lot of negatives anytime you get involved with a regional entity, right? With a
right, right.
how do you say, a government agency. That's
Right. Well, yeah. Well, I mean, you're talking about the local municipality. You're talking about the city of Oakland, but I'm also maybe the county, Alameda County, as well, is involved a little bit.
right. When it's different. Like, well, it's different depending on who you're talking to. Right. You learn a lot of things. This is what I've learned. I've learned a lot
Right.
about
Right.
that. When you work with a government agency, they all have different rules. Right. The municipal utility districts, they basically run their own country, right? They have all their own rules. They don't have to go to the city for anything. But the parks actually have to go to the city or the county for everything. So it just depends on how it is, right?
So you find the area, and then you're like, this is the best place, we want to build a boathouse. And so you start going to these different entities within the local government. You go.
Well, we actually designed it first so that we would have something to show. So we actually produced plans, like ideas of how it could look and what it could do. And
so you hired an architecture firm, and
we did, and that's expensive.
Yeah,
that's expensive. But we hired an architecture firm, and then we developed it, and then we realized how much it was going to cost us, right? And this is right before the bubble burst. So everyone was building, everything was super expensive. It got really crazy. And we were like, I don't know if this is going to are we going to be able to raise this?
When you say bubble, you mean the 2009, 2010?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It happened.
Recession, the Great Recession. Right.
We sort of, and then we were pretty good. But at that point, we'd created a really good relationship with the East Bay Regional Parks.
Right.
And East Bay Regional Parks has an amazing, they're the largest, I believe, regional park district in the country.
Right.
So they've got a lot of pull, they've got a lot of connections. And one of the things is we had a parent who was also a grant writer. And so what he did is he just researched grants for us, right? He just looked at grants, and he found a grant that we couldn't apply for, but East Bay Regional Parks could apply for.
Okay.
And and so because they were going to end up owning the building anyhow.
Right.
So we ended up applying for a grant through, I believe it was Boating and Waterways, California Boating and Waterways. And it was a grant to build a facility for inner city access to the water.
Okay.
And
so that was your first step, because you sort of done the architecture.
We tried to raise money first, and we realized, wow. Well, because part of the problem with raising money is, especially in California, no one wants to give you more than a 20-year lease, right? So if you're looking to raise $1 million or $12 million to build a building, no one's going to give you a 20-year lease on a $12 million building. So and East Bay Regional Parks has it in there. They won't give you a longer lease. Like, they might with an extension to renew, but they don't want to also box themselves in. So you kind of end up in this catch-22, right?
I see. So the challenge is, you're looking at, a multi-million-dollar facility. At least private donor is going to subsidize that when there's no guarantee that you're going to be there longer than 20 years.
Right. And you can't really pay it back in 20 years.
Right.
Hopefully. It'd be nice if someone was
right.
So
then you say, okay, well, how about grant opportunities, right? And then you start researching. You have somebody that steps up and says, I know how to do this. I've done it professionally at some level.
Yeah, I think we were really lucky. We had a lot of amazing people in place at the right time. I do think, I will be honest, it's luck and great. So this amazing parent stepped up, said, this is an amazing grant. We went to the East Bay Regional Parks, and they said, well, we don't have time to write it, but if you want to write it,
Right.
and defend it, we'll take the money, which of course they'd be happy with the money. So we,
Right.
so this parent wrote it. We defended it. We met with the boating and waterways guys. We talked to them. It was probably a solid year. And then we actually got the grant. I think it was a $10 million grant.
Wow.
That was big.
Wow.
I don't remember off the top of my head. Now, when you get that money and it goes to East Bay Regional Parks, a certain percent of that just goes to the park for their costs that they didn't actually have any of, but whatever.
Right.
So then
administrative costs.
Administrative costs, which is fine. And then it goes into their timeline and you have no control over it. So the problem we had, it wasn't a problem. It ended up being great, but it took from the day they got the money, they didn't have to actually break ground for 10 years. And they didn't, because they sit on the money. And this is like part of their, I didn't realize this at the time, but I'm like, all right, let's go. And they're like, oh, we got to make our plans. We got to get the contractors. So for us, it was a very, very long, I mean, it was 11 years before we actually moved into that building. Yeah. So it takes 10 years to build. I mean, they don't have to spend the money for 10 years and they can request an extension.
Right.
As long as they break ground on that one day, they have a whole nother year to spend the money. So they kind of get themselves 11 years.
Right.
That makes sense. And I don't remember the exact dates, but you
lost control at that point. So you're just sitting there working, but there are people within the parks department that maybe you can ping and say, hey, any update on this? Or they just like, we're going to slot you in. This is when we think we're going to start. And then you just,
we had meetings all the time. And I don't know, I don't know if the East Bay Regional Parks colors are green, and we call them the Jolly Green Giant because they just move really slow. And someone explained it to me one time. The Parks Department's job is to acquire land for public use.
Right.
And so their job is just to wait. They just wait. They wait. They'll wait you out. Right. You're going to pass away. We'll wait 20 years, 30 years. If you're going to give us your land, don't worry. We won't rush you. So everything moves at a glacial pace.
Right.
And nobody wants to lose their job. So everybody just sort of sticks within no one's willing to step out of the group. So it takes a long time. But in there,
So did you understand that going into it, or you're just like, oh
no, I learned that. That was my learning curve. It was a long learning curve because every day I'm like, they're going to break ground any day. And it's like, okay, 10 years later, been saying this for 10 years.
So it was 10 years.
It was 10 years before. I think it was almost 11 years before we moved into the building. Yeah.
Right. So, but at some point, around, let's say, you get the grant and then, 8-9 years later, they do finally break ground and they're hiring contractors and they're getting, and did they use your architectural plans? Did they
use our plan? And then mostly, they used our plan. The positive thing that happened was when they started to bid out the job, it was at the height of the bubble. So everything was really expensive. So we were supposed to build 3 buildings. And anytime you build on a park's land, at least in the East Bay, you also have to build a residence because they want someone living on so it gets more expensive. It's not just a building with, you actually have to have a building that has a residence in it so that they can have one of their employees have a place to live. And also it gives you a little more security, right? You have someone living there. There's a constant presence. It's not a bad thing, but it makes the project whole nother level of expensive.
Is that California thing? Is that a common thing?
That's an East Bay Regional Parks thing.
That's an East Bay Regional Parks thing.
Regional Parks. Yeah, I don't think it's a California thing.
Because I don't remember there being like an apartment when I visited.
Right above the first building, as you drive in down the driveway, there's a building. It's 2 stories. The upstairs apartment, and one of their employees lives there.
Oh, okay. And there was actually somebody living up there, and they are a caretaker of the facility.
Yeah, they don't actually work there. They work somewhere in the East Bay Regional Park. So our guy was actually a firefighter, a fire captain.
Oh, okay.
but
Right.
and they only are guaranteed housing for X number. It's a whole thing, but it gives them, we live in an expensive area, and it gives them security, and it gives them their employees a place to live. So it's positive. It's a win-win, but it makes it a more expensive project. So that's that was part of it as well, because then you're building a real building, so it takes a lot longer.
So and how long did the actual, so you're talking about 3 buildings, there's the sort of office, and I remember
and then there's our bay, then there's the Oakland Strokes area, and then there's another 2 bays. So there's 4 bays.
Right. And so how long would you say from the point where they broke ground to you're ready to move in? 18 months?
It was over a year.
Over a year, yeah.
They did it pretty fast. It was good. They did.
So once you got through the sort of, I don't mean to sound pejorative, but bureaucratic hurdles around getting the grant, waiting out Parks and Recreation to finally get around to building the facility, then the actual construction. And it's a great facility, right? I mean, it's perfect.
It is a great facility. That you're always, and this is the thing about these facilities, when you get involved in a facility like the Oakland Strokes that's built by the East Bay Regional Parks, they're always in charge, right? They're always in charge, and they're always pushing you. They're always pushing, they're right now, for example, they decided to redo, I just noticed they decided to redo a whole side of the park. So they've got like 1/8 of the parking, right? So the whole back parking lot is being redone it might be parking again, but they lost all extra storage space, so they're always sort of pushing you in, and they're always a hurry up and wait, like you have to do things really quickly, but they don't have to do things really quickly. Right. It's a hard, I think it's always hard to be under someone else's.
Was there through any part of that process, was there something about it where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe it was that easy? That was like,
I still think it was so hard.
Really. So what was then, and then what was the most challenging? Was it the weight?
The one thing the Oakland Strokes had that kept them making sure that we were part of it.
Right.
I mean, we had an agreement, but that, they got a lot of lawyers. We don't have a lot of lawyers.
Right.
We had the rights to the dock, and we never released that. And so they could build the building, but they couldn't put in a dock without us.
So, so that's really interesting. So that's potentially a point of leverage in your negotiations.
So if you have a dock in the Bay Area, and it could be different in other places, putting in a dock is a huge thing. The dock is the biggest thing.
Filings, environmental.
Not even the environmental. It's anytime you add something to the water, they want you to restore wetlands.
Right.
So if you take something out, you have the rights to put that back in somewhere. Okay, so we took out our dock at our original Oakland Strokes Boathouse, not even at Jack London, because that was a different deal.
Right.
We had the right to that dock, to put another dock in. And so we used that right to do it. And there's so many agencies that govern the San Francisco Bay. It's just to do anything, to change your windows. If your house is on the bay, you have to get approval from like 4 different agencies.
Right. So so you pulled the docks out from the very first facility that you had, the tugboat place. Right. 50 years. And then you still have rights to those docks, and then you say, we're going to put those here. And then that gives you just at least a little bit of leverage with Parks, and not over, but with Parks and Rec to continue to have access to the facility, because you're essentially not just for Oakland Strokes, but for the kayak rentals and whatever other services they want to offer. That's the point of access.
Exactly. Right. I mean, it's a beautiful facility. It's great. And it provides a lot of access. That's a public dock. People always say, can you have a public dock and still be a rowing dock? And I actually think it's not an issue sharing a dock with the public. It's really not. It's kind of nice, actually. I mean, every now and then I remember
Yeah, right. I remember there would always be a fisherman out there every once in a while, and that wasn't too
Yeah.
big of a deal. Um, Going back to working with the municipality, were there specific people that you knew they were sort of easier to work with? Did you have like, more friendlier relationships? Were those relationships?
You
Did you
have
look
to,
at
I think
relationships?
99% of getting something done is creating relationships and making them work. Like you
Right,
really cannot create enemies. You really
right,
have to
right, right,
create allies.
right,
And it might
right,
mean
right,
concessions, it might mean a lot of things, but you really need to have people on your side, because you need those people, even though you don't think they have any pull, you need them
right.
on your side, because
Yeah,
eventually they come back around. Like they always come back around. They change positions and then all of a sudden they're in charge again, or it just, those people always seem to circulate, and you just can't create enemies. As soon as you start creating enemies, it's a problem, you know.
if there would be somebody within, within Parks and Rec or the city that would retire or move on, and then somebody else comes in, would that you'd have to rebuild that
You
relationship
do have
all
to
over?
rebuild relationships. I think the main thing with all of this is relationships.
Yeah,
No matter what you do, you have to create relationships, and you have to make them feel like they are part of the solution and they are
right.
a savior, sort of thing. I mean, I'm not,
Yeah,
that might be a little nice, but that they're helping you, and that
yeah.
that you're thankful and grateful,
Yeah. Did you ever have an instance where, there was a somebody that the relationship soured, or did you feel like there was anybody specifically, not by name, but working against you, or said, I don't want this to happen?
You're always going to fight that. I mean, I think there's
Yeah,
always going to be someone who just has another agenda. And I
right,
don't want to say they're against you, because I think that's a bit strong. I think it's more
right,
have another agenda,
right,
right? And so when they have another
right.
agenda, it's like, well, how about if we work together? How do we do this together?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that the better way to do it is not, you're never going to change everybody, but if you can just get them on board with at least something
Right,
collaborative, it
right,
seems.
right, right. So the facility's done. You move in. Everybody's really excited. The relationship with Parks and Rec, and you're mostly working with
It's
Parks and
East Bay Regional
Recreation.
Parks. So it's the
East Bay
regional.
Regional Parks, right? East Bay Regional Parks. You're not really working with anybody else in the city. That's your primary point of contact with the local government. Yeah. And
That's
how's
correct.
that relationship going forward? You just sort of your tenants,
Your
you're paying rent. There's
tenants,
a lease.
yeah, as tenants, it's always hard as tenants, right? Because you're trying to make things better, and yet you're trying to also follow rules. So you're
Right,
kind of always pushing that little bit of a edge. But
right,
we created really good working relationships with the people who work
right,
there on a daily basis, and that
right,
makes it easier, because then when things go wrong, they come to you instead of going to their boss. and
right.
and 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 then they help you smooth things over. So I think creating those relationships and maintaining those relationships, again, is the key to all of it, right?
I was going to say that's a really, really important point, that you maintain those relationships, and yeah, maybe you're trying to push boundaries a little bit to facilitate growth within your organization, but maintaining those direct relationships with people means if there's a problem, they come to you. They don't complain to their boss, or they don't complain to oversight, right? And I think that's a really, really important point, is you want to maintain those personal relationships so that you don't become an
Yeah,
unpleasant tenant, right? I think
exactly.
that's, yeah, 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 yeah. Looking back, is there anything you would have done differently on that process, if you knew
Mm,
then what you know now?
uh, if I knew then what I know now, I would have. I don't know if I would have done it differently,
Hmm.
but I think that I wished we'd have had the ability to write in there that Oakland had a little bit more autonomy over the boathouse.
Right, right.
And
Did you
I
did
think
so you
so that you don't get
so
squeezed all the time.
right, right. So they're not taking half the parking spots, or did you ever feel like there was that um you talked a little bit about other agendas. Did you ever feel like there were people potentially within the parks department saying, hey, we have this whole facility, why aren't we doing more with it for the broader public? Why aren't we having kayak rentals? Why aren't we offering sailing classes? Did you ever feel that was an issue?
Always. But
Always.
at the same time, they ran, I don't know, 4 programs a year, and like they did more trainings than they did programs at the facility.
Right.
So really, knowing that the tides were really bad, and that people weren't that comfortable on the water. So there was a lot of things that, they use, I would say they use it, but they also use it as a huge storage facility in their side, which is kind of sad because it's waterfront, so
right.
it would be nice if they did more water, but
Yeah.
you can only do what you can do.
All right. Okay. So let's move on to the next project that you were a part of. I mean, building a facility like that, I mean, it's amazing, project to be a part of and say, hey, look at what we did. But then you didn't want to rest there. You wanted to move on and see how else you could grow the organization and strokes and offer rowing to the community. So at some point, somebody looked at the San Pablo Reservoir, right, which is about 10, maybe 15 miles east of Oakland. It's on the other side of the hills. It's outside the valley. Tell me how that started. Who looked at the reservoir and said, you know what? Why aren't we rowing here? And I think it's unusual for a club, especially when you have a facility and things are going to look at another body of water 15 miles away and say, you know what, we should be rowing here too. So talk a little bit about the San Pablo Reservoir and how you got going there.
We, San Pablo, we were looking for a place to have regattas.
Right.
Initially, that is exactly how it started. And San Pablo is a beautiful reservoir.
Right.
One of the only drinking reservoirs in Northern California that you also have access to boating on.
Right, which is extraordinary because if it's quote unquote potable water or drinking water, they never let you anywhere near it.
You're not allowed to touch it.
Right.
I'm like,
right.
Okay. So you're not allowed to touch it, but as long as you don't touch the water, which obviously happens, but it's one of the ones. And so this is the dealing with a different organization, right?
Right.
So this is East Bay Mud. So they're a municipal utility district, East Bay Municipal. And they own their land differently. So I said, can we make that dock longer? Because they had one little piece of low float dock that was about 10 feet long. And I said, what if we bought more pieces for that and just made it 60 feet long?
Okay, wait, back up for a second.
Yeah.
So who did you go to? Was there a person that you called?
There's actually
your feelers?
Yes, we got to know that there's 2 different entities there's a vendor, or not a vendor, concessionaire. So there's someone that rents boats on the lake, and they run sort of they take the money if you're going to launch a boat or whatever that is.
Right.
And then, but it's run by East Bay Mud. So East Bay Mud is in charge of the reservoir.
Right.
But someone else sort of manages it. I guess that's a good way to say it. Although manages only the public access, I should say.
Right.
So we went to them first, and they said, "Oh, we can't make a decision like you rowing on here. You have to go to East Bay." And so they told us who to talk to, and it just so happened that we knew some of them. We got to know them pretty well, and it was a really nice younger group. And I said, "What do you think?" And they said, "We'd love to have rowing at the reservoir, and we'd love to put on an event." Great.
Okay.
Here's the rules, and we said, "Okay, we can live with the rules," and then. Can we put on an event? And they said, well, yes, you can put on an event, but I don't think they've ever, you guys know how junior events get a little out of control. So the first event was really out of control, and we had way too many people, and didn't have a plan for parking. And it was not an ideal situation, but,
and was that a significant enough challenge that the East Bay Mud was then like, I don't know if this is a good idea. Like maybe we need to rethink
this. They have this was where we kind of left out, was for East Bay Mud. Their job is, look, we just don't want anything to take our time. So for example, if if the reservoir is running and no one's bothering us and nothing's breaking, we're happy, right? But if we have to do extra work, we're not happy. So we realized that pretty quickly. So we asked them, we said, look, we would love to put in a longer dock so we can hold this event. Can we do that? What do we need to do? Thinking that we're like on the San Francisco Bay. And they said, okay. And I'm like, so we can just slide it in the water and attach it. And they're like, yeah, sure. It's public access, right? I'm like, so we can just put it in. Yeah, do you need help? Like, we could bring our forklift over. I'm like, that would be great. So the way the utility districts own their land is they have 100% autonomy over their land. They can do whatever they want, unless you're building a building that people other than your employees are going to go in.
Right.
And you have to go to the city. But otherwise, like if we put up a temporary structure, put in docks, put up tents, none of that, we don't have to go to the city for any of that.
And so, even though this is potable water, like I'm not making an issue of it, but usually they're very, very careful with kind of, there's a lot of like environmental regulations and, you know, and codes and protocols, but they're just like, yeah, you know, you can put it in a dock and they're not worried about.
As long as it was brand new. It had to be brand new.
Brand new dock. So it's not like you're pulling it from some other body of water and putting it in.
Can't have any little friends on it. But
right. They're worried about invasive species and things like that, right? But that's kind of amazing, because usually, I mean, it does sound like you. Well, I don't want to say you lucked out, but it sounds like out. Again. Yeah.
You know, the other thing is we had the resources to do things for them. Right. So we had resources to do things for them. And I think that's the difference, right? They turned around and did things for us, but because we put the goodwill in first and said, how about if we put this longer dock? Of course, people can use it to launch their kayaks and their canoes all day long, and we'll just use it a little bit. And that made them happy. And so then, you know, so it's sort of like, sometimes you have to do things. You can't come into an organization and be like, we're going to start a rowing program. Now you have to supply us docks and you have to supply us this. And we need that. No one's going to go for that. You know, you have to come in doing them a little bit of a favor. So
you offered to put in the dock, but it wasn't like, we're going to put it in for the event and then take it back out. You're like, we're just going to leave this here. And then that's where it's
correct. We put in, we actually bought the exact same dock they had specifically so it would just flow. And we repaired their ramp so it would work. And, you know, and then they raised and lowered it for us because the reservoir changes height,
changes levels. Right.
But that way it was sort of their dock, but not our dock, but sort of our dock.
so then you start running. It's not just that you're running events. So you're running the fault line face off there for Southwest junior teams. Did you have to get like permits for that regatta? I mean, I knew there was.
We did not. We had to buy out the park for the weekend.
Okay.
So we had to, and I can tell you that it never gets bought out ever in the history of its life, except when Fault Line Face Off happened, because it's not a super active park. The biggest issue with running events there is when you invite, I don't even know how many teams is that, 12? It's about 12, 14 teams. And then you give everyone 2 parking spots. You give everyone a trailer's parking spot, place to put their boats. And kids, you have 0 parking spots for spectators. So the spectator parking was at the BART parking lot, and we had to run.
I remember that. You had to do the bus. Yeah.
And we had to pay for, I think we had 7 buses running continuous loops at the peak times.
Right. But I remember, because I did that. I think I did a recruiting trip there once, and I used the bus. And I remember thinking, like, actually, because, you know, you're always a little bit wary, like if you go to Natoma, how long is the bus going to take and all that. But I remember thinking like, oh, wow, actually, this is pretty easy. This is very, very easy.
Yeah, it was a lot, but it was a great venue to run a regatta.
Right.
The problem with the venue is, you know, in the spring in the San Francisco Bay, you get a lot of wind, and it's really windy in the afternoons over there. So you really cannot run events in the spring. You can run them in February, which is why we did Fault Line.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
And then so you're running that event there, but you're starting to actually put programs there, because you were running some afternoon learn to row sessions there as well. Yeah.
we did summer camps there. So one of the things we realized is at Oakland, about I would say 60 to 70% of all athletes come from, and we call it through the tunnel, but from the other side of the little hills there, right? The other side of the Berkeley Hill, which is the Lafayette, Orinda, the La Morinda area. And so almost 60%, probably might be more than that, 70% of our are coming from that side. And so with that, we knew running summer camps out there was such a great idea, because you get the kids hooked, and then you just be like, oh, you just have to drive through the little tunnel and it's fine, which is actually pretty far, but they the kids get excited about it.
And so, was there at that point with East Bay Mud, did you have to lease parking space, or they're just like, yeah, run your program? Is there any sort of overhead?
As long as we could just run the program. We could just run the programs.
Wow.
Yeah. We ran, where they charged was like, if the parents wanted to stay there for the hour, they would make the parents pay to park, but that was not our problem. So
right. Wow.
You can charge them.
Wow, that's amazing. That's great. And are they still running programs?
I'm not exactly sure. I know they're doing some stuff out there, but I don't think it's quite as much. I think it's
scaled back a little bit. Yeah.
They've
wow. Right.
It's a lot of work. Managing 2 facilities.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, I remember there was a fair bit of driving back and forth for staff and moving equipment around, obviously. But did they allow you to? How much did they allow you to store on site?
Well, so for the regattas, we took all 12 motorboats or 10 motorboats up there. Right. So that's it's a lot of driving, and then we took the 2 boat trailers, and then the hospitality trailer, and it was a lot. It was like moving your whole boathouse out there and then moving it all back.
Right. For the events, for sure.
It was a lot of work.
Wow. So, as we're sort of getting close to the end of our time here, I just, I want to talk a little bit about where you are now in NorCal, and, no pressure, right? But are we going to see a repeat performance with the Boathouse? What's happening?
I'm getting old. It's a lot of work. Right now, like NorCal, we were out at Bear Island.
Right.
There is a big possibility that we get a boathouse built there. And so they're working a bunch of different angles down there. I think there definitely needs to be in the South Bay public access to the water, and there's really not a lot. There's literally 2 spots that you can get to the water in the whole South Bay. I mean, it's not a lot of boat entry. It's all right there at the port. So I think there's the possibilities there. I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's also, we also have a lot of amazing people down there. You got Google, and you have Apple, and you have, if we can't get something built there, boy, I don't know. But
and it's interesting because so now you have this experience of working with the local government, on the East Bay side, and the potential to leverage that and working with the local government on in the Palo Alto area. And I don't know, what is the county in up there?
We are in Santa
Clara?
San
That's
Mateo?
not Santa Clara. San Mateo County, right. So working with the county and like where Bear Island and where NorCal is that owned by Palo Alto?
It's an interesting time. There's a lot going on down there right now. There's a lot of development happening in the port, and they're sort of gentrifying it a bit. And so I think that there's, they're creating this new road, and there's all of these things happening. And so I feel like it's sort of waiting for the proper opportunity, And I think it's there.
Apparently it takes 10 years, right? So,
forever.
It's a big,
and that's
big runway.
You start putting timelines on things, and it makes it very difficult.
Right, for sure. Okay, so final question, for somebody that's watching this, that's the leader of a rowing organization, and they're like, God, we gotta get a facility, we gotta improve access, we gotta expand our reach, we want more people on the water. Any specific points of advice on how they would get started in getting their facility going?
I think the most important thing is you can do amazing things with not a lot.
Right.
Right? You can row off a slab, you can row out of the dirt. I mean, we row out of the dirt
Right.
with a kayak, right? So
Right.
it's not, but the main thing is like do it right and make what you're doing good, and then people will see that what you're doing is a positive thing for kids, and then that's where you sort of start finding the opportunities to make things better, right? But you can take 2 containers, throw a roof over the top, and make a pretty awesome facility. It doesn't have to be an amazing building.
Yeah.
Start small and it can grow.
And it's sort of establish yourself within the community and your good intentions and your reputation for, you having not just youth, but adults having a good experience there. And then, once you have a little bit more community buy-in, then you're going, particularly as a nonprofit, you're going to get more support for growth, right?
I do think that the more, I always say, I don't mind if people quit rowing. I just want them to walk away saying it was a great experience and NorCal does a good job. So, or Oakland does a good job. Like I liked the coaches, just isn't for me. And you know what? To me, that's fine. Right.
Yeah.
But I don't want people leaving because they're horrible people or they're not good coaches. Like I want people to walk away with that good, warm, fuzzy feeling. And then that's how it goes out into the community, because the best publicity you get from anybody is parents. Parents talk, and God, do they talk, I know my kids used to be like, can you stop talking? So they talk about everything. And it's really important that what they talk about is positive if they're talking about you.
Right. And they largely, the parents of your athletes, a lot of them are going to be working in the community, right? And they're going to have those relationships established, right? They're going to be, best friends with the zoning board or somebody on the zoning board, right?
That's I think the most important thing is you never know who you're talking to, right? I was standing on the dock at Oakland watching middle school kids flop around or doing whatever they were doing. And a guy was standing next to me and he goes, "Oh, it's so fun to see my daughter row. I rowed at the academy." And I said, "Oh, you're in the Coast Guard?" And he goes, "Yeah." And then I'm like, and then of course I said, the Coast Guard, they're always waking us. Of course I had to launch into my negativity about the Coast Guard. And he turns to me and goes, "Do you know what I do?" And I go, "You work for the Coast Guard." And he goes, "I'm the commander of the Western Fleet." And I'm like, oh, I should ask who I'm speaking with before I start yapping my little brains. But we're still friends. He still stays in touch with me, and he's in Washington D.C. now. But it's really interesting. You never know who you're talking to, and you never know who can help you. So don't discount people. Always be polite.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time. I knew it was going to be a educational and enlightening conversation. I hope everybody that's able to watch this is able to gain some insight from your experiences. And I hope, best of luck for NorCal this season. And you guys are up 100% now, post-COVID, everything's post-pandemic, everything's
thank goodness. Thank goodness.
Great. Okay.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Wait.